Hi, this is Alex, and I want to answer a question, and I'm going to use this in a moment. The question is, what do you consider the best postures for women who complain of frozen shoulders? Okay, so we're starting with a yoga assumption that yoga can actually do something. And we're starting with the assumption that a yoga pose could do something. So let's just break that down for a second. I personally would not start with poses. What we want to start with is one of two things. One of three things. The very first thing you should do, if you haven't yet, if you don't remember it, is check out Gil Hedley's video on YouTube, and it's called The Fuzz Speech. The Fuzz Speech by Gil Hedley. You've got to check this out, because in a short nutshell, it shows one of the fundamental reasons we could get a frozen shoulder. There's many reasons. It could be mental, could be emotional, could be physical. As a source, as a reason we might be frozen. But to a large degree, there's a sense that this won't move, and then tissue builds up around it. So for the person for who that is the case, that the tissues won't work, or there's pain involved, then pose is the last thing I would do, or one of the last things I would do. To preempt, to set the shoulder up for success, there's two things that we want. One is pain-free movement, and two is to introduce change from the outside. So pain-free movement might look something like this. I walk in and I say, this shoulder is frozen. It hurts if I move it beyond here. It hurts if I move it beyond here. Without knowing anything else, one thing you could do to empower me is to start working with pain-free movement. Now, if we really open up to being creative, to letting go of assumptions and even what we think we know, we might just start out with what's simple movement that would give me success without pain. And what this does is it starts to connect movement with joy, with pleasure. If this feels good, or at the very least doesn't feel bad, then my nervous system says, great, let's have some more of that. I like that. So we can start to build the movement pattern. There are many, many exercises you could do. You can pick any exercise and start with this idea of successful movement in a pain-free range of motion. Breathing, relaxing, allowing the nervous system to learn. And then you can develop bigger and bigger movements. Now, the next level of specificity and skill would be to say, what does the shoulder do? What can it do? And what can we take it to do next? So remember that there's a few specific ranges of motion that build up all the movement patterns. One is elevation, depression, internal rotation, external rotation. abduction, horizontal abduction, taking it away from the midline, adduction, bringing it to the midline. We can take it beyond the midline, but we essentially have abduction, adduction. We've got flexion, and we've got extension. If I've forgotten any, you add it to the list below or write to me. But I think that's most of them. We can combine them in a movement that's called circumduction. So the question, one thing to do very specifically and very skillfully would be to assess someone's shoulder movement and ask them to do each one and assess them, rate them, score them. How do they do on each one? And that way you can track progress along all of those ranges of motion. And what's beautiful is you don't have to have any exercise repertoire to simply say, let's do a little bit of abduction. Okay, it hurts there? Great, let's hang out right there and play with a few other movement patterns. And just let it be gentle. Let the nervous system allow for success. If I can't take my hand out here with being completely pain-free, then strengthening, challenging it, and loading it with force in a pose might be a horrible idea. Forcing my arm to come into shoulder flexion, when flexion is only one of about 9 ranges of motion that I can do, might not be the best use of my energy and time to try to help a shoulder that's really, very upset. So again, movement patterns is number one. Now, I'm holding this yoga tune-up ball because this is one of the best tools. It's squishy, so it's gentle as a therapy ball. It's one of the best tools you could possibly use to introduce movement on your own from the outside. Now, you can get a rolfer, you can get a great body worker, and I can recommend some people. And they are going to really, really help you if they know what they're doing. But this is a great way to work with yourself. And you've got all sorts of wonderful muscles that will affect your shoulder. So again, without knowing anything about why that shoulder is frozen in the first place, we know that pec minor is a really rich source of relief. Your rotator cuff muscles, your supraspinatus, your teres minor and infraspinatus, your subscapularis, you can dig in there with your thumb. These are muscles that are really super wonderful to introduce movement from the outside. Then working into your deltoid, your lats, your serratus anterior. All these muscles are really wonderful to introduce movement on the outside. And if you don't have a therapy ball, you can use an apple. More seriously, you can just work it from the outside. And subtle movement from the outside can start to break up scar tissue and introduce more circulation to allow for the movement that needs to come in for healing to happen. So these are the two things. Pain-free movement patterns in your basic directions of movement for the shoulder. Play with pain-free movement patterns that involve all of your joints, including your neck. This is much more skillful and highly leveraged than any particular pose you could do. And then once you've got a good foundation through the movement and through soft tissue work that you do on yourself or someone else introduces for you, then you can start to challenge yourself with particular poses held for a bit longer period of time. Always keeping in mind that what actually creates healing here is the connection between the effort that you're producing and the sense of ease and comfort that you're holding. And when you work too hard, you actually can do some damage. So I invite you to hold the original definition of an asana and even of yoga, which is that intersection, the place in the middle between effort and ease. So I hope that's helpful to really think through what would be really beneficial.
We'll talk about Ashtang, the 8 limbs of yoga. And these limbs have been provided to us through ancient wisdom. Asht, 8, Ang, limbs. So 8 limbs to perform a journey with the least amount of karma, with the least amount of effort. So your journey is smooth, it's coherent, it's harmonious, and all the parts of the journey flow into each other. So what are these 8 limbs? So let's say you take a journey from point A to point B. And how can I make that journey most harmonious, smooth, comfortable, and productive and fruitful with the least amount of toxic residue that is left from the journey? The first limb is called yam, and yam represents the rules of the journey. So understanding as much as you can what are the rules that govern this journey. Finding out from your mentors, from your friends, from other people what are these rules, and then enforcing and making sure you understand these rules. The second limb is called niyam, and niyam is the discipline, the self-discipline, like guardrails you place around yourself to make sure that you are able to follow on the rules that you've set for yourself. Like guardrails around roads. When you're going on a mountainous roads, we have guardrails so you don't fall off. And the guardrails have to have some buffer. So they're not rigid guardrails, they don't hurt you, but they allow you to take a journey without imposing strict boundaries and limits. So there should be some buffer, fluidity in the niyam, in the guardrails. The third limb is called asana, and asana essentially places stress on you. So you stress yourself to make sure that when unexpected things happen, you're still able to survive, do well, and thrive. So asanas, which we do in a typical yoga class, where we take postures. Asana, the purpose of the asana is to create that robust body, robust mind, where you can handle stress without panicking, without being anxious, without suffering a sense of despair, discomfort, and so on. The fourth limb is called pranayam, and pranayam, which pran means life, yam, rules of life, it essentially represents the nourishment we need to carry our journey. Just like a car needs gasoline or electricity or some other energy source, we need nourishment to carry our journey. The first and most important nourishment is breath. Without breath, we can't survive. So a lot of emphasis is placed in yoga on very slow, mindful, deep breathing, opening our lungs, filling our lungs with fresh, clean air. So breath is one part of nourishment. There are many other nourishments. Food, nourishing food which is healthy, fruits and nuts and vegetables, something that nourishes your body and provides healthful benefits, and not toxic kind of food food that is hurting your body. Love is also nourishment, so having loving relationships in your life which allow you to grow, nurture, and follow your path with a sense of optimism and joy. So loving relationships. Also being in nature, just being surrounded by beautiful trees, ocean, mountains. Being in nature provides nourishment. It provides that sense of I'm important, the world is beautiful, and I'm participating in this beautiful world. Also, nourishment comes from just wealth. One needs money, one needs wealth also to sustain a journey. So one can't ignore this, although that's not the only nourishment, that's one of the nourishments. One needs to pay attention to material wealth as well. So material well-being is also part of pranayama. So these 5 elements: breath, food, love,